That evening at the restaurant, a man labeled my son worthless. I remained quiet. But a mother's silence isn't surrender, it's calculation. My name is Margaret Hayes. I'm 57 years old. Before I continue, please like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. This tale started in a sophisticated steakhouse in the heart of downtown, beneath the gentle glow of crystal lights and the hushed conversations of other diners. That particular evening, my son Daniel was formally presenting me to the family of Sarah, his bride-to-be. It was their celebration dinner. Everything was meant to be flawless. We arrived punctually. I wore a navy dress, understated yet refined. Daniel appeared anxious in his charcoal suit, the same one he wore when he received his promotion at the firm where he's employed. He squeezed my hand before we entered. "Mom, everything will be fine," he assured me. I nodded, but something stirred in my chest, an uneasiness I couldn't identify in that moment. Richard Bennett was already seated at the reserved table. He was a man in his early 60s, stocky, with silver hair combed back smoothly, and a gold timepiece that gleamed almost offensively on his wrist. His wife, Patricia, smiled tensely beside him. Sarah looked radiant, clutching Daniel's arm. We settled in. Wine was ordered. The initial exchanges were courteous, superficial. We discussed the weather, the venue, the upcoming wedding. Richard requested the priciest steak without glancing at the menu. I chose the grilled salmon. Daniel ordered linguine. Then, while we awaited our meals, Richard reclined in his seat. He lifted his wine glass and studied Daniel with that variety of smile that never touches the eyes. "So, Daniel," he began, "what exactly is it that you do professionally?" My son cleared his throat. "I'm a financial analyst at Morrison & Associates, Mr. Bennett." Richard lifted an eyebrow. "Analyst," he echoed, as though the word tasted bitter. "And what does an analyst earn?" An awkward hush fell over the table. Patricia looked away. Sarah gripped Daniel's hand beneath the table. "Sufficient to live comfortably, Dad," Sarah interjected softly, but Richard wasn't listening to her. His focus remained fixed on my son. "Because understand this, Daniel," he continued, refilling his glass. "My daughter has experienced certain privileges. European vacations, elite education, violin instruction. I'm uncertain if you comprehend the standards she's accustomed to." Daniel nodded, attempting to maintain his composure. "I understand, sir, and that's precisely why I work diligently every single day. I want to provide her with the finest." Richard released a brief laugh, devoid of humor. "The finest on an analyst's income?" He placed the glass down with a sharp sound. "Let's be frank, young man. A nobody like you isn't suitable for my daughter. She deserves someone at her level, not someone who can barely manage a decent meal out." The entire restaurant seemed to freeze. The words lingered in the atmosphere like toxic gas. I felt my skin prickle. I felt heat rising to my face. But I said nothing. "Not yet." Daniel lowered his gaze. I observed his hands trembling slightly on the table. I saw how he clenched his jaw to prevent tears. "Dad, please," Sarah whispered, her face pale. But Richard was already rising, tossing his napkin onto his plate. "I'm merely speaking truth. And if my daughter marries anyone, it must be someone of substance, not just anyone." I stood slowly. I gathered my purse. I looked at Daniel and touched his shoulder gently. "Let's go, son." He nodded without meeting my eyes. Sarah attempted to stop him, but Daniel was already heading toward the exit. I followed in silence, head raised, heart shattered. Outside beneath the streetlights, Daniel stopped and inhaled deeply. His eyes glistened. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, his voice breaking. I should have responded. I should have. No, I interrupted, taking his face in my hands. You did well. Dignity isn't defended through shouting, Daniel. It's defended by living. He nodded, though it still wounded him deeply. We entered the car and drove home without speaking. But that night, while Daniel slept, I remained awake in the family room with a cup of coffee cradled in my hands and my gaze lost through the window. I thought about that man, Richard Bennett. I thought about his words, his arrogance, his venom. And then I recalled something. A name on a document, a face in a corporate photograph. Richard Bennett worked at Morrison and Associates, at my company. And he didn't realize it. I smiled faintly, without joy. A mother's silence isn't weakness. It's patience. And patience sometimes delivers the most unforgiving justice. Sometimes we place excessive trust in people we shouldn't. Have you ever been let down by someone you cared for? What happens when Margaret reveals her true identity? The confrontation that follows will leave you speechless. The days following that dinner felt strange. Daniel left each morning for work with the same punctuality as always. But something within him had shifted. He no longer hummed while preparing coffee. He no longer shared amusing anecdotes about his colleagues during breakfast. He ate silently, staring at his plate as if searching for answers at the bottom of his bowl. I didn't speak much either. I didn't know what to say. How do you comfort a son when the words that wounded him didn't come from an adversary, but from the father of the woman he loves? One afternoon while preparing dinner, I heard the door open. Daniel entered looking drained, loosening his tie. He collapsed onto the sofa and closed his eyes. "How was your day, son?" I called from the kitchen. "Same as always, Mom," he responded without opening his eyes. That was untrue. I recognized that tone. It was the tone of someone carrying a burden they cannot name. I sat beside him and offered him a cup of chamomile tea, the same I made him as a child when he couldn't sleep. "Thanks," he murmured, accepting the cup in his hands. "Have you spoken with Sarah?" I asked gently. He nodded. "Yes, every day. And she's deeply embarrassed about what occurred. She's apologized countless times. She claims her dad isn't normally like that he was stressed about work, that she's trying to justify the unjustifiable," I interrupted calmly. Daniel looked at me. "I don't want this to destroy us, Mom. I love Sarah and she loves me. Her father, well, he's another matter entirely." I nodded. I wasn't going to debate with him. It wasn't the moment. But in my chest, a certainty was growing stronger each day. Richard Bennett didn't know the woman whose son he had humiliated that evening. After Daniel went to sleep, I powered on my computer and accessed the human resources database of Morrison and Associates. I typed the name Richard Bennett. There he was. Operations Director. 23 years with the firm. Substantial salary. Spotless record. No documented incidents. An exemplary employee according to the data. But numbers don't reveal the complete story, do they? I closed the laptop and stared at the dark screen, seeing my own reflection in the black glass. I remembered how I came to own Morrison and Associates. It hadn't been simple. It hadn't been swift. But it had been earned. I allowed my mind to travel back years, to when everything began. I was 25 when I met Thomas, Daniel's father. He was a hard-working man, honest, with the calloused hands of someone who doesn't fear labor. We married in a modest ceremony with flowers from my mother's garden and a dress she stitched herself. Thomas worked at a small logistics firm. I was an administrative aide at a government office back then. We earned little, but we were content. We rented a 2-bedroom apartment in a peaceful neighborhood. We shared dinner together every evening. When Daniel was born, the world became simultaneously smaller and larger. Smaller because my entire universe fit into that infant crying in my arms. Larger because suddenly I grasped the magnitude of love a mother can feel. Thomas was an engaged father. He changed diapers. He rocked him to sleep. He sang improvised songs that had neither rhythm nor logic. Daniel laughed regardless. But life sometimes doesn't ask if you're prepared. Daniel was 6 when Thomas died. It was a traffic collision. A truck that didn't brake in time. A curve miscalculated. A second that altered everything. I remember the day of the funeral. I remember the rain striking the black umbrella. I remember Daniel clutching my hand, asking me when Daddy was returning. I had no answer, only tears. We were left alone, him and me. No savings, no insurance, only that month's rent paid and a half-empty pantry. That night, after tucking Daniel into bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and a pencil. I calculated. I added. I subtracted. The mathematics were cruel. It wasn't enough. But I wasn't going to surrender. Not for me. For him. The next day, I knocked on doors. I searched for work everywhere. Offices, shops, restaurants. Finally, I secured a position as an accounting aide at a medium-sized company called Morrison & Associates. It was an import and export enterprise with offices in 3 states. The owner, Mr. Morrison, was an elderly man, serious but just. I worked like never before. I arrived early. I departed late. I learned every process, every system, every detail. Mr. Morrison noticed. "Margaret," he told me one day, "you have vision. You don't simply perform your job. You understand the business." He promoted me to general accountant, then to finance director, then to operations manager. Each promotion was earned through sweat, sleepless nights, and difficult decisions. Daniel grew up watching me work, watching me fight. Mr. Morrison had no children. His wife had passed years ago. The company was his legacy, but he had no one to leave it to. When he turned 75, he summoned me to his office. "Margaret, I want you to purchase the company," he said directly. I was speechless. "Mr. Morrison, I don't have that capital." "I know." He smiled. "That's why we're going to establish a payment plan. You operate the company, expand it, and pay me with the profits. I trust you more than any external investor." I accepted. How could I not? It was the opportunity of a lifetime. The chance to give Daniel a secure future. For 10 years, I worked day and night. I expanded the company, established new trade routes, hired exceptional talent, paid every dollar I owed Mr. Morrison. When he passed at 86, he left a clear will. Morrison & Associates was officially mine. I had completed the full payment 3 years before his death. The company that today employed more than 300 people with offices in 5 cities was mine. But I never boasted. I never flaunted it. I remained the same Margaret who rented apartments and counted pennies. Daniel grew up observing my example. He studied finance, graduated with honors. When he requested a position at Morrison & Associates, I agreed, but with one condition. You enter as an analyst. No advantages, no last name. If you want to advance, you earn it. And he did. Nobody in the company knew he was my son. He used his father's surname, Daniel Reed. I was still Margaret Hayes, the discreet president who rarely appeared in general assemblies. Richard Bennett had worked at the company since before I purchased it. He was efficient, compliant, but we never crossed paths personally. I knew his name on reports, on annual assessments. I knew he existed, but he didn't know who I was. Until now. I turned off the living room light and went upstairs to my room. I lay down staring at the ceiling, remembering everything I had built, everything I had protected. And I thought about Richard Bennett sitting in his director's office, oblivious to the storm approaching. Because tomorrow he would receive a summons, a summons to the president's office. And I would be waiting for him. While I share all this, I wonder where you might be listening. Write the name of your city in the comments. The confrontation between Margaret and Richard will reveal truths that change everything. You won't believe what happens next. The next morning dawned overcast. One of those mornings where the sky appears heavy with unanswered questions. I rose early as always. I brewed coffee in the same aged coffee maker I'd used for 20 years. The aroma filled the kitchen, and for a moment everything seemed normal. But nothing was normal. Daniel descended the stairs later than usual. He had his suit on, tie properly knotted, but his eyes held that dullness of someone who hadn't slept well. "Good morning, Mom," he greeted, attempting to sound cheerful. "Good morning, son. Would you like eggs?" "No thanks, just coffee." He sat across from me and accepted the cup I offered. For a while, only the sound of the spoon against the porcelain could be heard and the distant murmur of vehicles on the street. "Today I'm going to discuss the wedding date with Sarah," he said finally without looking at me. "I want us to move forward. I'm not going to allow what happened to ruin our future." I nodded slowly. "And her father?" Daniel clenched his jaw. "Sarah says she's going to speak with him, that she's going to request he apologize." "That? And do you believe he will?" He looked up, surprised by my tone. "Mom, she's not responsible for how her father behaves." "I know, son. I didn't say that. I only asked if you believe he's going to change." Michael looked down again. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "But I have to try. For her, for us." I didn't press further. Sometimes the most difficult lessons are learned through living, not listening. I had already made my decision. Now I simply had to wait. I bid Daniel farewell at the door. I watched him enter his car and drive away down the street. Then I departed too. But I didn't take my personal vehicle. I took the black sedan with a driver that I used only for special occasions. Today was one of them. During the drive to Morrison and Associates headquarters, I mentally reviewed what I was going to say. I couldn't be emotional. I couldn't be vengeful. I had to be exactly what I had always been: professional, composed, unwavering when necessary. The Morrison and Associates building rose on one of the main avenues downtown. 12 floors of glass and steel. In the lobby, employees greeted me with respect as I passed. Some newer ones didn't recognize me. Others lowered their heads with an almost imperceptible nod. I proceeded directly to the 12th floor. My office occupied the entire east wing. Wide windows overlooking the city, a solid mahogany desk, shelves filled with finance books, international trade texts, and hidden among them, some poetry volumes that no one knew I read. My assistant, Claire, was waiting for me with the day's schedule. "Good morning, Mrs. Hayes. You have a meeting with the logistics director at 10, lunch with the legal team at 1, and—" "Claire," I interrupted her calmly, "I need you to send a summons." She retrieved her notebook, prepared to write. "To Mr. Richard Bennett, Operations Director. Tell him I need to see him today at 11 sharp, here in my office." Claire blinked, surprised. It was unusual for me to directly summon area directors. Normally, I worked through the department heads. "Any reason I should mention, ma'am?" "No. Just tell him it's urgent." "Understood." Claire departed the office and closed the door behind her. I sat in my chair and gazed out the window. From there, I could see the entire city. Thousands of people walking, working, living their lives without knowing that in this moment, in this office, a woman was about to confront the man who had humiliated her son. But not with shouts, not with threats, with something far more powerful: the truth. At 5 minutes to 11, Claire notified me through the intercom. "Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Bennett is here. Send him in." I took a deep breath. I stood and walked toward the window, turning my back to the door. I heard the sound of footsteps entering, the creak of leather soles against the wooden floor. "Mrs. Hayes?" a male voice asked, confused. "Excuse me, I think there's been a mistake. I was summoned to see the president." I turned slowly. Richard Bennett stood before me in his impeccable gray suit and his gold watch gleaming under the office lights. But on his face in that moment, there was something I hadn't seen at dinner. Uncertainty. "There was no mistake, Mr. Bennett," I said with a calm voice. "I am the president." I witnessed the color drain from his face, how his eyes widened gradually, how his mouth opened without finding words. "You?" he stammered. "Yes." I nodded. "Me. Margaret Hayes, owner and president of Morrison and Associates. And also, in case you don't recall, the mother of the nobody who, according to you, isn't suitable for your daughter." Richard took a step back as if my words were a physical strike. His face shifted from white to crimson. He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised a hand. "Sit down, Mr. Bennett." He obeyed, nearly stumbling over the chair. He sat with his hands on his knees, perspiring. I returned to my desk and sat across from him, hands clasped on the polished surface. "You have been working at this company for 23 years, I began, looking directly into his eyes. "Your performance evaluation has consistently been good. You meet your targets. You haven't had serious incidents. You are, on paper, an exemplary employee." Richard nodded nervously. "Mrs. Hayes, I didn't know." "I know," I interrupted him. "You didn't know who I was. And precisely because of that, you said what you said. Because you thought you could humiliate my son without consequences, because you believed your arrogance wouldn't have a price." "It was a misunderstanding, ma'am. I was stressed." "Stressed," I completed with irony. "Tired, worried. What's the excuse you're going to use today, Mr. Bennett?" He lowered his head. "I have no excuse," he murmured. There was a long silence. Outside, the hum of the city continued. Inside, it was just him and me and the weight of his own words. "Daniel," I said finally, "is my only son. I raised him alone since he was 6. I worked 3 jobs to pay for his education. I stayed up late helping him with homework. I watched him grow, study, strive. He entered this company without a last name, without privileges, without anyone knowing who his mother was. And he earned his position through work, through dedication, through honesty." Richard looked up with moist eyes. "Mrs. Hayes, please." "And you," I continued without raising my voice, but with every word sharp as a blade, "called him a nobody. You humiliated him in front of his fiancée, in front of his family, in front of me. You told him he wasn't good enough for your daughter." "It was a terrible mistake," he whispered. "A mistake I can't undo." "No," I nodded. "You can't. Words, Mr. Bennett, don't erase. They remain. They adhere." He nodded, hands trembling. I leaned back in my chair and observed him for a long moment. I saw a man who all his life had believed that money, status, and last names were the only things that mattered. And now he was before someone who had built all that from scratch without flaunting it, without humiliating anyone. "Do you know what's the most tragic part of all this, Mr. Bennett?" I asked calmly. "Silence. That you didn't humiliate my son because he was irresponsible or dishonest. You humiliated him because you believed he didn't have enough money. As if a man's value were measured by his bank account." Richard said nothing, just kept his head lowered, hands clenched on his knees. "I could terminate you right now," I continued. "I could ensure your name never appears in any reputable company in this city again. I have the power to do so. You know that." He nodded almost imperceptibly. But I'm not going to do it. Richard looked up, surprised. Because I am not like you, I said firmly. I don't measure people by their bank accounts. I measure them by their character. And your character, Mr. Bennet, has considerable work to do. I stood up. He stood too, awkwardly. You may leave, I said. And think very carefully about the kind of man you want to be from now on. Richard nodded, not daring to meet my eyes. He walked toward the door, but before leaving, he stopped. Mrs. Hayes, he said with a broken voice. I'm sorry. I truly am sorry. I didn't answer. I only watched him until he departed and closed the door behind him. When I was alone, I sat again and gazed out the window. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. Only a quiet certainty. I had defended my son without shouting, without threatening, without lowering myself to his level. Dignity is not begged for. It's worn. Have you ever had to remain silent to protect someone you love? But this confrontation was just the beginning. What Richard does next will test Margaret's resolve in ways she never imagined. That afternoon when Daniel came home, he found me in the kitchen preparing vegetable soup. How was your day, Mom? He asked, leaving his briefcase on the table. Quiet, I replied, stirring the pot. And yours? Quiet too, although something peculiar happened. What thing? Richard, Sarah's dad. He works at my company. Today I saw him in the corridor and… I don't know, Mom, he looked strange. Pale, sweating. He nodded at me and kept walking quickly as if he was in a hurry. I said nothing, just kept stirring the soup. Do you think he's unwell? Daniel asked. I don't know, son, I replied. Sometimes people become sick in the soul before the body. Daniel looked at me curiously but asked no more questions. He sat at the table and started checking his phone. I served the soup in 2 deep bowls and sat across from him. Sarah and I talked today, Daniel said while blowing on his spoon. We're going to proceed with the wedding. She says her dad is regretful, that he's been very quiet these days. And how do you feel about that? Daniel shrugged. I don't know. I suppose if he changes, I can forgive. But I'm not going to forget, Mom. I'm never going to forget what he said. You don't have to forget, I said gently. You just have to decide if what he said defines who you are. And the answer is no. You're worth what you do, not what others say about you. Daniel smiled. You know, sometimes I think you're the wisest woman I know. I'm not wise, son. I'm just experienced, I joked. He laughed. And for a moment, everything was acceptable. But I knew this wasn't finished. Richard Bennet had received a lesson. Now we had to see if he learned it. Because life has a curious way of teaching. Sometimes with words, sometimes with silences, and sometimes with a mother who knows how to wait for the precise moment to say, I was there too, and I don't forget either. The days began to pass with a strange normality. Daniel kept going to work. Sarah called him every night. And I watched. I watched how my son tried to build a future on the ruins of a humiliation that still wounded. One afternoon while preparing lunch, I heard the front door open earlier than usual. Daniel entered with a forced smile and a bouquet of flowers in his hands. Are those for me? I asked, surprised. No, Mom, he laughed. They're for Sarah. I'm going to her house tonight. She wants us to discuss the wedding with her family. I felt a knot in my stomach. With her family? Is he going to be there too? Yes, Daniel interrupted, knowing exactly whom I was referring to. Richard is going to be there, but Sarah says he wants to apologize formally, that he's been very different since that night. I dried my hands on my apron and walked over to him. Son, you don't have to do this. You don't have to expose yourself again. Mom, he said gently, taking my hands. If I'm going to marry Sarah, I have to learn to coexist with her family. I cannot avoid them all my life. But that doesn't mean you should subject yourself to another humiliation. He won't do it, he assured. But I'm not going to deny Sarah the chance to repair things either. She's not responsible for having a difficult father. I hugged him. He smelled like the cologne I had given him for his birthday. He smelled like my boy, even though he was already a man. Okay, I sighed. Go. But if anything goes wrong, call me. No matter the time. I will, Mom. I promise. He departed shortly after 6. I watched from the window as he got into his car with a bouquet of flowers on the passenger seat and that naive hope that only good people possess. I remained alone in the house. The television was on, but I wasn't listening to it. I was only thinking about Daniel sitting in the living room of that family that had scorned him. I was only thinking about how he was going to pretend everything was fine when his heart still bore the mark of those words. A nobody like you isn't suitable for my daughter. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I couldn't protect him from everything, but I could be ready to catch him if he fell. Daniel returned past 11 at night. I heard him enter slowly, trying not to make noise, but I was still awake in the living room with a cup of cold tea in my hands. Mom, he asked, surprised to see me. I thought you were already asleep. I couldn't, I admitted. How did it go? He sat next to me on the sofa and loosened his tie. His eyes looked tired. It was uncomfortable, he said finally, but not as terrible as I thought. Was Richard there? Yes. He apologized to me. I raised my eyebrows. Really? Daniel nodded. Yes, in front of his entire family. He said he had been out of line that night, that he was concerned about his daughter, but that he had no right to speak to me like that, that he was very sorry. And what did you say? I told him I accepted his apology, he replied quietly, because Sarah was there looking at me with those pleading eyes. And why else? Because I want this to work, Mom. I want to believe people can change. I said nothing, just observed him. I saw my son choosing peace over dignity, choosing love over pride. And I didn't know whether to feel proud or worried. Did he seem sincere? I asked carefully. Daniel shrugged. I don't know. He was nervous. He was sweating a lot. He didn't look me directly in the eyes, but he said it. And that's something, right? Yes, I replied. It's something. But in my chest, something told me Richard Bennett's apologies didn't come from regret. They came from fear. From the fear of what I could do to him, from the fear of losing his position, his status, his comfort. Men like him don't change overnight. They just learn to conceal their poison better. Did you talk about the wedding? I asked, changing the subject. Daniel's face brightened a little. Yes. Sarah wants to get married in June in the garden of an estate she saw online. She says it will be something small, intimate, just close family and friends. And is her father going to pay? Daniel shook his head. He offered, but Sarah and I decided we're going to pay for it between the two of us. We don't want to owe him anything. I smiled. There was my son. Proud. Dignified. Sounds good to me, I said. And if you need help, Mom. No. You've already done enough for me. We're going to do this ourselves. I hugged him, and in that embrace, I tried to convey everything I couldn't with words. That I was proud. That I loved him. That I would always be there for him. But there was also something else. Something I couldn't share yet. A truth growing in my chest like a dark seed. Richard Bennett hadn't apologized because he felt it. He had apologized because I had demanded it without words, because he knew I had the power to destroy everything he had built. And that wasn't regret. It was survival. The following days passed in a deceptive routine. Daniel went to work with renewed spirit. Sarah came to dinner at home some nights, always polite, always affectionate with him. She was a sweet girl. I couldn't deny it. But every time I looked at her, I saw the shadow of her father behind her. One afternoon, Sarah stayed to help me wash the dishes while Daniel answered a work call in the living room. "Mrs. Margaret," she said timidly, "I want you to know I'm very sorry for what happened at that dinner." "You don't have to apologize, dear," I replied, drying a plate. "You didn't say anything." "I know, but my dad shouldn't have spoken like that. I tried to stop him, but when he gets like that, it's impossible to make him listen to reason." "Does he get like that often?" Sarah looked down. "Sometimes, when he's stressed or when he feels things aren't going his way. But deep down he's a good person, Mrs. Margaret. Just that he has very firm ideas about how things should be." "Firm ideas are good," I said calmly, "but not when they hurt others." She nodded with moist eyes. "I love Daniel," she said softly. "And I know he doesn't have as much money as my dad would like, but he's hardworking. He's honest. He's good to me. Shouldn't that be what matters?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw a girl trapped between love for her father and love for her fiancé. I saw someone who had grown up with privileges but who had also grown up with pressure, with expectations, with a father who measured people's worth in numbers. "Yes, dear," I said finally. "That is what should matter. And if Daniel makes you happy, then nothing else matters." She smiled, relieved. "Thank you, Mrs. Margaret. You're very understanding. Not all mothers-in-law are like that." "I'm not a mother-in-law yet," I joked. "But when I am, I just want to see you happy and see my son happy." We finished washing the dishes. Daniel returned to the kitchen and they bid farewell with a kiss at the door. I remained at the window watching them drive away in Sarah's car, and I wondered how much longer Daniel could live in that limbo, forgiving without forgetting, moving forward while carrying the weight of humiliation, building a future with a family that had rejected him. That night, sitting in my bed with an open book I wasn't reading, I received an email on my phone. It was from Claire, my assistant. "Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Richard Bennett requested a meeting with you for tomorrow, first thing in the morning. He says it's urgent. Did you confirm?" I stared at the message for a long time. What would he want now? More apologies? Explanations? Or maybe he thought he could negotiate with me. I replied, "Confirm tomorrow at 9. I turned off the light and lay down, but I didn't sleep. I just thought about what I would say to him, how I would keep calm, how I would make him understand that he couldn't buy my forgiveness with empty words. Because I was not like him. I didn't measure people by their bank accounts. I measured them by their character. And his character, so far, was counterfeit currency. Sometimes love requires letting go. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between family and happiness? Richard's next move will force Margaret to make the hardest decision of her life. And when Sarah is forced to choose between her father and Daniel, the truth about love and loyalty will be revealed. The next morning, I arrived at the office early. Claire was already there with the coffee ready and the day's schedule printed. "Mr. Bennett arrived 10 minutes ago," she informed me. "He's waiting in the boardroom." "In the boardroom?" I asked, surprised. "Why not in the waiting area?" "He requested privacy. He said what he wanted to discuss was delicate." I nodded. I took my coffee and walked toward the boardroom. I opened the door without knocking. Richard Bennett was standing by the window looking at the city. Upon hearing me enter, he turned quickly. He was wearing the same gray suit as always, but now he seemed smaller, more vulnerable. "Mrs. Hayes," he greeted with a trembling voice. "Thank you for seeing me." "You have 5 minutes," I said, sitting at the head of the table. Speak. He swallowed and sat across from me. I wanted to thank you for not terminating me, for giving me another chance. I didn't give you any chance, Mr. Bennett. I simply decided not to act based on emotions. That doesn't mean you're forgiven. He nodded nervously. I understand, and that's why I came. I wanted to explain why I said what I said that night. I'm not interested, I interrupted. Reasons don't change the damage. Please, he pleaded. Just let me explain. Afterwards, if you want to fire me, I'll understand. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I nodded. You have 3 minutes. Richard took a deep breath. I grew up poor, Mrs. Hayes. Very poor. My father was a bricklayer. My mother washed other people's clothes. We lived in a 2-room house with a dirt floor. I wore torn shoes and ate beans every day. He paused. I said nothing. When I grew up, I swore I would never be poor again. I studied with scholarships. I worked nights. I graduated and got a position at this company 23 years ago. And since then, every dollar I've earned, I've saved. I've invested. I've multiplied. Because I didn't want my daughter to live what I lived. And that's why you turned her into someone who only values money? I asked coldly. No, he denied quickly. I just wanted to protect her. I wanted her to have the best. And when I saw Daniel, when I knew he was a simple analyst, I was afraid. Afraid that she would suffer. Afraid that he couldn't give her the life she deserves. Daniel is not simple anything, I said with a firm voice. He's a hard-working man, honest and good. And if you cannot see that, then the problem isn't my son. It's you. Richard lowered his head. I know now. But that night I only saw my past. I saw the poor boy I was. And I didn't want that for my daughter. There was silence. Outside, the noise of the city continued. Inside, it was just him and me and the weight of our stories. I understand your fear, Mr. Bennett, I said finally. But fear doesn't justify cruelty. And what you did that night was cruel. It was, he admitted. And I can't undo it. I can only try to be better. For my daughter, for her future husband, for you. Don't do it for me, I said, standing up. Do it because it's the right thing. Now leave. I have work. Richard stood, nodded, and walked toward the door. But before leaving, he stopped. Mrs. Hayes, can I ask you something? What? Why didn't you fire me? You had every right. I looked him directly in the eyes. Because I'm not like you, Mr. Bennett. I don't destroy people because I can. I give them the chance to destroy themselves or to build themselves better. He left without saying anything else. The weeks passed as inevitable things pass, slowly at first, then all at once. Daniel and Sarah moved forward with wedding plans. They chose flowers, tasted cakes, debated whether the ceremony would be at sunset or midday. I watched them plan their future and felt a strange mix of happiness and apprehension. One Thursday afternoon, Daniel came home earlier than usual. He had a furrowed brow and a tension in his shoulders that I recognized immediately. Did something happen, son? I asked while chopping vegetables for the salad. He left his briefcase on the table and sat down with a sigh. I don't know, Mom. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. I put the knife down and sat across from him. Tell me. Daniel ran his hands through his hair, a gesture he'd made since he was a child when he was nervous. It's Sarah, he said finally. She's been distant, like worried about something she doesn't want to tell me. Did you ask her? Yes, several times. But every time she tells me she's fine, that she's just tired from work and wedding preparations. But I know her, Mom. Something is going on. I got up and made 2 cups of tea. I passed him one and sat down again. Sometimes people carry things they don't know how to share, I said gently. Give her time. If it's important, she'll tell you. Michael nodded, but he didn't look convinced. What if it has to do with her dad? What if he's putting ideas in her head again? Like what ideas? Like I'm not enough. Like she deserves something better. Like… Daniel, I interrupted him, taking his hand. If Sarah loves you, nothing her father says is going to change that. And if what he says does make her doubt, then maybe it wasn't as solid as you thought. He looked at me with those eyes that still held something of the boy I raised. The boy who believed love conquered all. I love her, Mom. I don't want to lose her. I know, son. But love isn't about holding on. It's about trusting. 2 days later, a Saturday morning, the doorbell rang. It was barely 9. Daniel was still sleeping. I was in the kitchen making sweetbread when I heard the sound. I opened the door and found Sarah. But it wasn't the smiling and polite Sarah of always. This Sarah had red eyes, a pale face, and trembling hands. Sarah? What happened? I asked, alarmed, letting her in. She collapsed on the living room sofa and began to cry. A deep cry. One of those that come from the stomach. I sat beside her and hugged her without saying anything. Sometimes that's the only thing a woman needs. Someone to hold her while she falls apart. Several minutes passed before she could speak. I'm sorry, Mrs. Margaret, she said between sobs. I shouldn't have come like this, but I didn't know where else to go. It's okay, dear. Breathe. Take your time. I handed her a tissue. She wiped her tears and took a deep breath. It's my dad, she said finally. I felt my chest tighten. What happened with him? Sarah squeezed the tissue in her hands. Last night, we had a terrible argument. The worst of my life. He told me I cannot marry Daniel. Why? Because he says he found out something about the company where they work. He says that Daniel is never going to grow there, that he's just another employee, that he has no future. I stayed very still, very quiet, because I knew exactly what was happening. Richard was sowing doubt. He was using his position in the company to make his daughter believe that Daniel was less than he was. And what did you tell him? I asked. I told him I didn't care, that I loved Daniel anyway. But he got furious. He told me I was making the biggest mistake of my life, that I was going to regret it, that… She broke down again, lips trembling. What else did he tell you, Sarah? She looked at me with eyes full of tears. He told me that if I married Daniel, he would disinherit me. That I wouldn't see a dollar of his money. That I would have to manage on my own. There it was. The true face of Richard Bennett. Not the regretful man who came to my office with explanations and apologies, but the man who used money as a weapon, as a chain. And what are you going to do? I asked calmly. Sarah covered her face with her hands. I don't know. I don't know. I love Daniel, Mrs. Margaret. I love him with all my heart, but my dad is all I have. My mom died when I was 15. He raised me alone. He paid for college. He gave me everything. How can I turn my back on him? You don't have to turn your back on him, I said gently. But you don't have to let him control your life either. But the money. Money is not love, Sarah. Money is just money. And if your father truly loves you, he wouldn't condition you like that. She sobbed again. I don't know what to do. I'm afraid. Afraid of choosing wrong. Afraid of regretting it. I took her hands in mine. Dear, The only mistake you can make is living the life someone else chose for you. If you love Daniel, marry him. If you don't love him enough, then let him go. But don't do it out of fear. Don't do it for money. Do it for you. At that moment, we heard footsteps on the stairs. Daniel came down in sweatpants and a wrinkled t-shirt with messy hair.
"Sarah," he said, surprised to see her.
"What are you doing here so early?" Sarah quickly wiped her tears and forced a smile. "I came to see your mom. I wanted to ask her for advice about the wedding floral arrangements." Daniel looked at me. I nodded slightly, confirming the lie. He wasn't stupid. He knew something else was happening, but decided not to press. "Do you want breakfast?" he offered. "Mom makes the best pancakes." Sarah shook her head. "No thanks. I have to go.
"My dad is waiting for me."
She stood up. I did too. I walked her to the door while Daniel went to the kitchen for a glass of water. "Thank you, Mrs. Margaret," Sarah whispered.
"For listening to me."
"You can always come, dear."
"Always."
She nodded and left. I watched her get into her car and drive away down the street, and in my chest grew a dark certainty. Richard Bennett hadn't changed. He had just learned to hide his poison better. The weeks that followed were heartbreaking. Sarah stopped calling. Daniel stopped smiling. I stopped sleeping. Then one evening, Daniel came home with tears in his eyes. "She broke up with me, Mom." Those 4 words shattered my heart.
"When? How?"
"An hour ago. She called. She told me she can't marry me. That her dad is right. That we come from different worlds.
That it's better this way."
I held him while he fell apart. "I'm sorry, son."
"I'm so sorry."
"I love her, Mom," he cried. "I love her so much. Why wasn't I enough?" "It's not that, Daniel. It's not you. It's her. It's her fear.
It's her family."
But I did everything right. I worked hard. I was honest. I was good to her.
Why wasn't it enough?
I had no answer. Because sometimes love isn't enough when fear is bigger. When the chains of money are stronger than the bonds of the heart. The next day, I summoned Richard Bennett to my office. This time, there was no patience in my voice. No mercy. I showed him the audit. I showed him the evidence of workplace discrimination. I showed him how he'd tried to sabotage my son's career. "You have 2 options," I said coldly. "Resign with dignity, or be exposed publicly. You decide." His face went white.
"You planned this from the beginning."
"No," I denied. "You planned it when you decided to humiliate my son at that dinner. I just documented the consequences of your own actions." Within a week, Richard Bennett resigned. Within a month, Daniel met Andrea, a civil engineer with a warm smile and a strong heart. Within a year, they were engaged. And I realized something beautiful. Sometimes we lose what we think we need to find what we actually deserve. Today, 2 years later, I'm sitting in my office on the 12th floor. My name is Margaret Hayes. I'm 59 years old. Daniel is happy. Truly happy. He's building a life with Andrea, a woman who loves him not despite who he is, but because of who he is. Richard Bennett works as a junior analyst now, earning a fraction of what he once made. Some call it karma. I call it balance. Sarah married a lawyer with an important last name. I heard they're expecting a child. I hope she's happy. I truly do. Because at the end of the day, we all deserve happiness. We just have to be brave enough to choose it over fear. Tell me in the comments. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. Life always collects its debts. And I didn't have to do anything but wait, protect my son, and remember that a mother's silence is not weakness. It's patience. It's strategy. It's love in its most powerful form. Richard Bennett called my son a nobody at an elegant dinner, believing money gave him that right. And years later, he probably sees my photo in business magazines, in articles about female leadership, in invitations to keynote lectures. And he probably understands now what it truly means to be worth something. It's not having money. It's having dignity. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched your heart, subscribe and hit the bell to hear more stories of women who transform their pain into wisdom. Every day, a woman. A life lesson. Share this story with someone you love. Sometimes a story like this can change a whole day. God bless you, and until next time.